was not the Antichrist, he was one of the forerunners, the ones who would set the stage. Well, when it all began coming true and the dates were there for the beginning of the war, one of the readers wrote in and called me and said, you notice you turn that around in the mirror. M-A-B-U-S becomes S-U-D-M, Saddam. So they're there in many different ways, and one I'm going to read today is one that I just noticed, which also brings up Saddam in connection with the bombings that have just occurred. Another anagram form that I had not even noticed until I went back to go over it again. But he told us the dates for the beginning of the Gulf War 3 times because he said this is the beginning of everything. When you look back through history, he said if you look back through World War I, World War II, you will see many little incidents that occurred before the actual war began. He said as you look back through history, you will see the Gulf War was the beginning of the Third World War if it occurred. And I've always been saying that in my lectures, if it occurred, because I did not want it to happen. But now if you notice they're saying on TV that it all began with the Gulf War. Have you heard that? Because they said part of what the terrorists are so angry about is because we trespassed on their soil, we desecrated their soil, even though we were there to help them. It doesn't matter. Their extreme belief in the Muslim religion is that we desecrated their soil, and that way we are the enemy. So this explains where he meant it was going to begin with the Gulf War, and it was going to progress. And we were giving many different steps along the way. He said if you could just stop any of these steps, maybe you could divert this thing from occurring. We were given, he said after this began, you will go to war in the gray area of Europe. He called it the gray area because he said you don't know if you're in Europe or if you're in Asia. And he used the names Macedonia and Albania because he didn't have a name for Yugoslavia. And he said you must not go into that area because it will be the next step of the escalation that will lead to the war. And we had a date in the quatrains was 1995. He said if you could stay out of the gray area through 1995, maybe there's a hope of diverting the whole series of events. So what happened, President Clinton sent the troops in before about November of 1995. I've been lecturing on this all these years, so I was keeping track of all these dates. And Nostradamus did say that would it be a Democratic president that had a mule in one of the symbolisms. And he said this would be Democratic president that all this would begin under. And he said, you get in there, you're not going to get out. But this was very important. But we did send the troops in there. Clinton promised to get them out, and they're not out yet. That was another part of the steps that were going to happen. I'll probably think of some more because there has been so many as I've been doing this. We'll say, okay, this is prediction. Nostradamus said that the future is not set in stone. It doesn't have to be. That the future is many probabilities and possibilities. This is what people have to understand and what I've been trying to get through to people in all my lectures all over the world. That the future is many branches is what he saw. Many probabilities and possibilities going off in many different directions. From the worst to the least of any event. And they would come into what he called a nexus point. At that nexus point, there was an event or a personality that had to be. There was no way around that. The third Antichrist is at one of these nexus points. The atomic bomb was at one of those nexus points. The great genius is at one of these nexus points, and I'll be talking about him before we're finished. But after that nexus point, these were things that had to be because they were set in history. Then futures branch out again into many probabilities and possibilities. And that's why he meant, I'm showing you the worst case scenario. What will happen if you don't do anything? If you keep progressing down that path. So that's what I've been trying to tell people if they could He said, you don't know the power of your own mind, that you bring everything into your life that is into your life. You create your own reality. If you know that, you can just as easily uncreate that reality if it's not what you like and create a different future for yourself. So people kept asking me, well, what can we do? During the Gulf War, I was on the radio every day during the Gulf War, people wanting to know what they could do. One man said, I can't even get the city to fix a hole in the street outside my house. You know, one person doesn't have that much influence. He said, you have more power than you realize once you learn to focus your mind. But he said, if the power of one person is that powerful, imagine the power of group mind if it is focused and organized. So he was having me tell people all over the world, if they had prayer groups, if they had meditation groups, if they had some groups anywhere that were interested in this kind of thing, they could only take 5 minutes out of their meeting to focus on peace and harmony. That would be our reality. So that was what I was talking about, and I was hoping that it was being successful. Maybe we've only succeeded in postponing it for a few years, but maybe we'll be able to stop the worst of what he saw if we realize the power of our own minds. Because he kept saying, you must not go into this war, because if you do, it will be the most horrible war ever in history. I have one whole chapter in volume 1 on experimental weaponry that he saw. And it's horrible. We don't want to go that way. He said there will be atomic weapons, there will be laser weapons, there will be biological weapons, there will be chemical weapons, things you can't even imagine that are already being experimented on, and a lot of them are already perfected. And through the years, he has told us definite ones that have been perfected and are now developed. He told us about the HAARP Project long before it was even into the news. And I was communicating with Nick Bainage, who wrote the book, you know, Angels Don't Play This Harp. And I told him the prophecy occurring concerning that had to do with scientists playing around with the energy fields of the atmosphere and succeeding in actually tearing a rip in the atmosphere. And it sounds exactly like what he found out with HAARP. And this is experiments, you probably know a lot about that are being conducted by the US government up in Alaska, where Nick is from. I told him, I started telling this all over the world. He said, I want people to know. But so much of this has come true that the books are now going into 6th reprint. Every time they would go into reprint, I would add some little part in the book saying, this occurred on thus and such a date. It got to the point about 1996, I believe it was, I could no longer insert in the text unless I was going to write all 3 volumes. I added a 50-page addendum to volume 1 of all the events that had just occurred in 2 years alone. We're now going into reprint again, and I'll be adding 4, now maybe 5 pages with this of events that had just occurred in the last year or so since the last reprint. The election was in there in the tiniest detail. Everyone kept calling me and asking me. Nostradamus called that the hung jury election. And they all kept saying, is this the year of the hung jury election? And up till now, it didn't seem like it was. But the week before the election, I was lecturing in Berkeley, California at the university there, and I told them, here is the prediction. It takes up 2 pages. It's not quick. It is very, very detailed. I said, we'll see what happens next week. Then I was on the air election night, say we only have a few more hours to go.